November of 2008, I discovered, my CFO actually discovered it, but that he had not only embezzled $500,000, but was committing bank fraud.
Today, I'm excited to share a powerful two-part conversation with my friend Michael Erath. He's a seasoned entrepreneur, author, and coach who knows what it really takes to build, rebuild, and scale a business the right way. Now, let me ask you this. What would you do if you discovered someone in your company was committing fraud? And what if that person was someone very close to you? Well, Michael had that exact experience, and in this interview, he shares not only the story, but also the lessons that came from it. On a quick note, during our first recording, we ran into some technical difficulties. Rather than lose momentum, we picked things back up in a second session to make sure you get the full value of Michael's insights. So, what you're about to hear is a conversation delivered in two parts, each one packed with wisdom, stories, and practical takeaways you won't want to miss. Let's jump in with Michael Erath. Well, Michael, thank you for joining us on the I See Rich People podcast. I got a chance to see one of your speeches with Joe Polish a couple weeks ago, and I was amazed by the depth of your knowledge. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it, Matt. Thanks so much.
I know that you started a small operation and turned that into something really big, and then 2009 hit and some bad things happened, and you've kind of come back up. So let's start back with how did you get into being an entrepreneur?
I was second generation in a family manufacturing business, and like a lot of kids in a family business, high school, college, summer breaks, spring breaks, all those times I was just working and working in the business, and decided when I was in college that was the route I wanted to go. So when I came into the business, we manufactured hardwood veneer for the furniture industry, and in the 90s. And prior to that, most of the furniture manufacturers in the US were in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And our facility, our manufacturing facility, was in Virginia. So we were one of the few suppliers that was right in the back door of a lot of our clients. Late 90s, early 2000s, those companies all started moving offshore and taking their production, outsourcing it to primarily China at first, and then it moved into Vietnam, Southeast Asia. And even now into India. And so when I was born, my father was 44. So by the time I got out of college, he was ready to start slowing down a little bit. And so by the time I was around 26, I was taking over operations of the business, which was premature in hindsight, but I also had spent a lot of time kind of growing up in the business. And one of the first challenges was to really transition to more of an international company because now we had to follow our clients overseas. And so I took us from over about a 12-year period, took us from an $8 million domestic business to a $45 million company that was about 90% export. Part of that genesis over time was I wanted to vertically integrate the business. Our biggest challenge was sourcing quality raw materials. So I wanted to get closer to the timber source. And rather than going into, for example, we would go to sawmills and we would buy a small percentage of the hardwood logs that they had, the premium logs, we'd pay a premium price. So I brought on a partner that we started setting up a subsidiary company inside of the entity that he directed. And his background was in timber merchandising. So we started buying standing timber, buying large parcels of timber, and he would merchandise everything we didn't want to produce. So we got our raw materials cheaper. We had more control of the resource. And that worked really, really well. We became very close friends. I became his son's godfather. We spent quite a lot of time together as families.
Hey, real quick, we're building a community of entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs. These are people just like you who want to start or grow their businesses and are ready to take the next step. If that sounds like something you want to be a part of, sign up and join us today.
November of 2008, I discovered, my CFO actually discovered it, but that he had not only embezzled $500,000, but was committing bank fraud. So this was within the first few months of the housing market collapse. We were very closely tied to the housing industry. So our revenues were declining drastically as we were kind of going into that recession. And what we found out in the investigation was that he had been well, he was putting an addition on his home, which he was running through the company and having the controller reclassify invoices that he was paying contractors for the work on his home. They were reclassifying them as invoices paid to our freight forwarders. So it wasn't uncommon. We were shipping about 200 containers a month. So it wasn't uncommon to have $20,000, $30,000 freight forwarding bills. So they were just masking them that way, which is why I ended up not seeing it. Because when I looked at our Peachtree accounting software register, it looked all legitimate. So long story short, he ended up, to keep the line of credit availability high as revenues were declining, he started falsifying invoices to convert inventory, which they advanced 25% against, into receivables that they advanced 85% against from the bank's perspective. So that kept the availability of our line of credit up so he could continue pulling money out to finish the addition on his home. So we figured all this out. I had the pleasure, if you want to call it that, of on the same day going to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the bank together with our legal team, my CFO. We had hired a retired FBI forensic accountant that was doing private investigative work, and that was kind of the team. And so we went and turned over everything we had and explained the situation. Took about 4 years. He finally pled guilty on 2 counts, spent 2 years in federal prison. But in that process, the bank immediately froze all of our credit. So during the early stages of the Great Recession, because of this, we actually became illiquid overnight. And on a personal level, we were at a situation where my father had passed. He passed in 2003. My mother, we had through the estate planning, we had transacted her out of the business, but I had taken on a $6 million term note to add equipment, expand our factory about a year prior to all of this happening. She was hung on that bank guarantee, even though she no longer
Oh
had equity in
no.
the business. So now I was faced with a situation where I had to navigate how to best protect my mother and her assets, as well as my wife and I, because we were all entangled in this guarantee. And the advantage, the leverage, the one point of leverage I had was we owed the bank enough money, and we were in such a niche industry that if they had put us in bankruptcy and we just kind of done like most people and thrown the keys at the bank, they would have recovered next to nothing on the equipment because there would just be no market for it. So I was able to negotiate with the special assets group that if they would give me enough liquidity to slowly unwind the business over time, we could at least get everybody more recovered than if they forced us into bankruptcy. And I think, were it not for the recession coming and all the fires they had with all the people that were handing the keys to the bank and having the lawyers fight it out, I don't know that they would have accepted that. But given the timing, I was one less fire to fight in the moment. And so it was an appealing option for them. So they actually negotiated with me and we did that. And it took about 18 months. And I admittedly had some very fortunate breaks along the way, but got the bank made whole, got the creditors made whole. My wife and I, we were in our late 30s. We decided we would take the haircut and we just kind of wanted to live to fight another day. So we managed our way through all of that, started a new business. We moved to Ohio from Virginia, where we had a contract manufacturer we could outsource production to. Started a new business there, grew that from a startup to about 7 million before I finally was done with that industry. Decided to exit the business and start spending the second half of my career coaching and consulting other entrepreneurs.
What were the biggest takeaways for you through all of that? Because it sounds very painful. Sitting here
Sure.
talking to you, it seems like you've processed it, but what was the key thing? And how do you prevent that from happening again?
Sure. I think it in many ways comes back to, there's a quote that I use to open the book that I just released, Five Obsessions of Elite Organizations. And we'll talk about that later, but it's a quote from, I've seen it attributed to Edwards Deming, but in the research for the book, there was actually a healthcare CEO named Paul Batalden, who I believe it's actually attributed to. And the quote is that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. If you want a different result, you need a different system. And I think, like many entrepreneurs, I I made too many decisions based on how I felt or on emotion versus really designing the right system. So, for example, this guy and I were very, very close friends. So it was very easy to trust what he was saying to me and not put systems in place that, were he an arm's length partner, I would have put in place, or in hindsight, I know now to put in place. Even structural things. This was a very small thing, but it ended up becoming a real key point in his enablement to do this, to carry out this fraud. Normally, I would have had, even though this was a separate entity that he was managing, I would have had the controller in that entity report to our corporate CFO. At his direction, I allowed her to report directly to my partner instead.
Mm.
In the investigation, it was alleged, and there were a couple of witnesses to corroborate this, that the two of them were actually having an affair, because they had two sets of financial statements. When we were going back through all of the email communications and all of those things as part of the investigation, there was month after month where she would ask him, which one of the reports do you want Michael, and Bob was our CFO, to see? And the question initially was, well, she had no financial interest in this. Why would she commit fraud um, to benefit him when there's nothing in it for her? And then as it started to unravel, this allegation that there was an affair going on started to create, okay, now there's an emotional reason why she would do some of this.
Wow.
Yeah,
What a story.
right.
Wow. Are there any other than the having the controller to report directly to your CFO, are there other things that a business owner could do to prevent something like that from happening to them?
Sure. We did not have, so for example, I mean, we had an organizational structure, and that was somewhat loose. We did not have really clear expectations for every role. We didn't have a reporting cadence where we were doing quarterly reviews and checking in on people's progress versus certain numbers. There were things, we weren't tracking enough of the right data. There were lots of things that if we had had these subsystems and structures in place, things that felt a little bit off from time to time, but were easily explained away, would not have been able to be easily explained away. Right? It would have forced us to go deeper into conversations that would have kind of pierced the veil of this trust that I had with this partner.
Yeah. Nearly everybody that I have on the podcast has some sort of interesting backstory like yours,
Right.
where they're going along, there's some dip, and then they use this as rocket fuel to get to the next level.
Right.
As painful as this is, do you see now how it's actually helping you to be where you are today?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. So in 2017, I was encouraged to write a book about this story. So the first book that I published is called Rise, and it's this entire journey. And there's a quote from Steve Jobs that I use in that book, where he says that you can never connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. And you have to have faith that the dots will somehow connect. And I
Mhm.
think looking backwards, yes, and the the things that I experienced and went through as part of all of that has in many ways become a stepping off point for what I'm doing now, and it brings a different level of experience. You mentioned the Genius Network interview, and the day before I was interviewed, Cameron Harold was interviewed, and he and Joe were talking about the difference between someone who can talk about how to be successful versus somebody who's actually done it and been on that journey and been through the ups and downs. And that, when I transitioned into what I do now, and I decided to build out a firm and bring on partners to so I could scale what we're doing, that was when I decided I wanted to set the bar for anybody who becomes a partner at Next Level Growth to have to have been an owner, CEO, or president of a business with more than 10 million in revenue and at least 50 employees, which when I was in so I'm in YPO Gold now, but when I originally joined YPO, that was the standard, was 10 million in revenue, 50 or more employees. And so I just
Mhm.
maintained that standard because I think if you have had full P&L responsibility, and especially ownership accountability for a business at that scale, you've encountered just about all of the challenges and struggles that a 50 million or $100 million business will. But if you're getting into coaching and you've been an employee, but never in that full accountability role of a president, CEO, or owner, or your business never got past, 1 or 2 million dollars, you've not experienced all of the complexities that larger organizations do. And so we've set that as kind of the standard for now the 10 of us that are working as partners and guides at Next Level Growth.
That's great. I really like to hear that. I think there's a lot of people claiming to be coaches these days, but they really have very little experience other than they put their shingle up or they put their web page up and
Right.
said, I'm a coach. And they don't have any life experience. They don't have any business experience.
Right.
So how are you going to help somebody through the struggles if you've never rafted the guy down down the river, so to speak?
Exactly. It's interesting. As I was doing my research for this book, I did some research on business coaches in the United States. And on LinkedIn, currently, according to the research I did, there are more than 53,000 people who call themselves business coaches in the United States. You talk about a sea of sameness. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it does seem like, I mean, if I look in my inbox in LinkedIn, it seems like 5 times a day somebody who's a business coach is trying to connect.
Yeah, and everybody out there trying to tell you how to do it has zero
Right,
experience,
right.
how to make money, how to sell something. How yeah, that's amazing. So tell us a little bit more about the five obsessions, your new book, the five obsessions of elite organizations, and then let's break this down to Pareto's principle. There's five of them. Which one is the most important?
Okay, so kind of where this came from is when I started the second business when we'd moved to Ohio. Um, During my prior career and my time in YPO, my form mates and I had we had read and implemented a lot of top grading in our businesses. We had read Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and some of Vern Harnish's early concepts and ideas. We implemented some of those things, and we also went through Good to Great together. And I became really fascinated with profit per X, and I went very deep in my own business with understanding that, and then using that as an analytical framework to change the way we made decisions. Um, so when I started the second business, I read Traction, and I started kind of going down the EOS path, but self-implementing it. And one of the things I found was I felt like the holistic approach was really good, and there were some very good tools in there, but I also felt like some of the tools were not as good as things I had already come across or used in my businesses. So I started substituting things out, and I kind of created my own hybrid version of or model of EOS. So when I exited that business in 2015, I spent a few years with EOS. I was one of the top earning EOS implementers in 2017 through 19, and then I ended up leaving and deciding to start my own thing, because what I started to realize was the the business operating systems available to entrepreneurs are highly prescriptive. And when you have a prescriptive kind of one size fits all system, by default it puts primacy on the system, not the user. And I feel like that's the wrong order, right? I feel like primacy should be on the user and their outcomes, not on the system. Too many times I've now onboarded clients who have come from running on EOS, and one of the frustrations is, my implementer said we couldn't do it that way because that wasn't pure, or things like that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? How That's not entrepreneurial at all. So we really tried to flip that on its head. And what I started to realize is that at its core, truly elite organizations, business organizations, nonprofits, and even sports organizations, at their core, there's a small set of principles that they all are focused on and excel in. And the best of the best do it to the point that it's truly an obsession. And so that's what created this framework. And what we realized was if we can help entrepreneurs build their own custom designed operating systems as an underlayment to a higher level focus on these five principles, and how in their unique business, their unique circumstances, their unique industry, their unique culture, how they can excel in these five areas. And we work more as almost like a Sherpa, helping them find the right tools, making sure those tools fit for them, making sure that they can implement and drive them all the way down to the front lines of the business, then we can help them excel in these 5 areas, and they'll have fantastic results. And by doing that, we always keep primacy on the user. The system is always secondary, and that's really been the big differentiator or the big pivot. I think to your second question, um, I
Did we have
oh,
you listed all five of them?
no, not yet. So you talked about the
Okay.
Pareto principle and kind of the which is most important. And I think it depends. I think the starting point depends on where the organization is, but I don't believe you ever become truly elite if you are not equally driving each of them. And so we've got an assessment on our website called the Elite Organizations Assessment, and we use that as a gauge to kind of figure out where are the greatest opportunities and how do we want to structure the onboarding of a client to make sure that they get maximum value first. But the five obsessions are: number one is great people, and we typically start with people. We take kind of a who first approach. And when I say great people, I think a lot of people sometimes roll their eyes and like, yeah, read good to great, and I hear bright people rate seats all the time, but how do you actually do it? Like everybody says, it's a great concept. So we have been fanatical about building systems and structures and ways to really take action on and operationalize how to fill your organization with great people, how to coach and develop people, and how to really take an obsessive mindset around that. But it's great people is the first obsession. The second obsession is an inspiring purpose. And when we talk about an inspiring purpose, it's really about having those great people aligned and motivated and driven by a purpose that's highly inspiring to them. Because if you think about it, so I could come to work for your school, and I could be a great culture fit. I could align with your values, and I could be really skilled in my role. But if I don't have an emotional connection to the organization and what we do and why we do it, who we do it for, it will feel like a transactional job to me. But if you can capture me emotionally, I will always bring more creativity and passion and energy to the work that I do. And if that spreads across the organization, it elevates everybody. It elevates the organization. The teams perform better. It leads to greater team cohesion. And people will almost always bring their best selves when they feel like they're part of a bigger purpose. And so, I often find that most organizations put their entire marketing budget into external marketing, and zero is spent marketing their message back internally to their people. And I think that's a
Mhm.
big gap that is difficult to measure, but is highly valuable. So it's great people aligned and driven by an inspiring purpose. The third obsession is that they're provided optimized playbooks. And so for onboarding, training new employees, we need SOPs, we need work instructions. But this is the idea that even when somebody has been through the onboarding, they've been with you for a while, having kind of high level checklists and workflows that are visible to them that they can follow to make sure they don't take shortcuts or start skipping steps. It's human nature to take shortcuts, right? And so if you think about an airline pilot, if they start taking shortcuts, bad things potentially happen, right? And for airline pilots, they have massive manuals that they have studied and trained on and learned that they never look at when they're flying a plane. But they have checklists that they flip through and are working through together to make sure they never skip a step. Imagine if you have 10 people on a sales team and they all go through the same training, and you've got a sales playbook and they're all trained on it, but then over time, there's no checklist to keep them on task with those things. They are highly likely to build their own workarounds and shortcuts. But if you've got 10 people, now they're doing it 10 different ways, and it creates chaos, and your sales engine becomes less effective. So having some sort of a high level structure and checklists and workflows that are really optimized for the way that you should do things as an entity, then people have something to follow. It actually takes pressure off of them, and it makes things easier on them to have those checklists to follow. So optimized playbooks. The fourth is a culture of performance. And the idea behind a culture of performance is it's not intended to be a punitive, hard driven thing. A culture of performance is about setting clear expectations with people, making sure they understand what winning looks like in their role, and giving them feedback and data so they know while they're playing the game on a daily basis, if they're winning, if they're behind, what needs to change. And through that feedback system, identifying who's underperforming and having a system designed to coach and develop those people as long as they're coachable. Some people just aren't coachable. They won't take the feedback, and we need to have guardrails on that system so that we coach them out. But ideally, what I tend to find, and all of our partners I think would agree with this, between 80 and 90% of people that are identified as underperformers in organizations with effective coaching and development will level up to be able to perform in their roles. It's a very small percentage that actually can't, but if you have systemized that, most people will not stick around to get fired. They will actually exit the business because they see they're not meeting the performance expectations. It will eventually lead to termination if they can't level up. They're not embracing the coaching, or they realize they don't have the aptitude. Well, now they're not your HR problem because they left on their own terms. Right. But the guardrails do create a system where eventually it will lead to termination if somebody's not able to level up. But that's also fair to them because you've given them opportunities, you've given them support. And then the fifth and final obsession is around growing profits and cash flow. And I often hear people say that profit and cash is a byproduct of doing everything else well. And I think that's just intellectually lazy to take that position, because if you treat profits and cash like a byproduct, it will be. That's all it will be. If you believe in your purpose, then your profit and cash flow is the fuel you put back into the engine to do more of it. And how can you ever be elite if you can't explain to me your pricing strategy, why you price things the way you do, and the logic behind it or the strategy behind it? If you're not paying attention to your cash conversion cycles and how to make incremental improvements in that, you potentially run out of cash or put yourself in cash constrained positions, which now you have to make decisions out of necessity, not out of design and strategy. um, there's so many things that impact profit and cash, even teaching financial literacy to employees. um, when
And
employees oh yeah, go ahead.
you have a great example of how to teach financial literacy to
Yeah.
employees. I love this YouTube video. I'll see if we can share it in our video.
Okay.
But do you want to just walk people through that real quick? How you train the
Yeah.
average employee about financial literacy?
Yeah, if you want to put a link to that in the show notes, that would be great. But what I did, and this, I beat my head against the wall for a while in our manufacturing company, because we had low wage employees who had never been taught anything about financial literacy. And we would often, so for example, if we shipped a container of veneer somewhere, that the invoice for that container could easily be 80, 90, $100,000. And when employees would see things like that in packing lists or in documents we were sending to clients, there was kind of this attitude or mindset that if it was $100,000 invoice, I probably had a safe in my basement that I just stuck $100,000 of cash in. Like they couldn't connect the dots at all. And when we tried to explain it using the real numbers, those numbers were so big that they just couldn't wrap their minds around it. And then they would shut down. So what I did is I took our financial statement and I took all of the expenses, the overheads, everything from all of the cost of sales categories, and I looked at them as a percentage of revenue. And I took an image of $100 bill on a photocopier and I blew it up to 10 inches wide. And on the back of it, I just, with a pen, I scored the bill. And so let's say, for example, our raw materials cost of goods sold was 20%. I would mark off 2 inches of the dollar. And let's say that the freight we paid to get the raw materials in, which is also cost of sales, was another 3% of the $100. I would score another 3%. And I just kept scoring the back of the bill for all of the different categories of expenses we paid for. And so the exercise, the way I did it with this 10-inch wide image of a $100 bill and a pair of scissors, is I met with teams of these employees and I explained to them, every time we sell $100 worth of product, we had to spend this much of that to purchase the logs. And I would cut away that part of the dollar. Then I would cut away the sliver for how much we had to spend on freight. Then I would cut away the percentage of direct labor. So we got to pay all of you guys to do this. Well, that comes out of that $100 bill. And I just walked all the way down through it. And what was interesting is at the end, and we were a high volume, low margin industry. So at the end, there might be $5 or $6 of the 100 left over that is our profit. And what I would remind them is, okay, so now we have to pay taxes on that, right? Cut away that percentage. Then I would ask them, after we've paid taxes, do you think we need to reinvest in the business, in new equipment and things like that? I would cut away another sliver because we have to put aside money for those reinvestments. And now I'm down to maybe $1 or $2 left over. And the real kicker at the end was, because that was hugely enlightening to them. A lot of people were really surprised. I said, now, what do you think happens if you damage a product, you mismanufacture something, or we damage some finished goods and we have to go replace it? And in one of the instances that I did this, one of the guys who's a forklift operator named Tony spoke up and said, "You probably have to write a check back to the company, don't you?" It was like, now you get it.
All right. Well, I'm back today with Michael Erath. As every entrepreneur knows, not everything goes smoothly, and we had some technical issues. So, this is actually part two of the podcast. And so, we had kind of left off, Michael, with you about to describe the financial literacy. You have an amazing YouTube video, and they can look that up and we can put that in the show notes. But will you briefly tell us about how you teach the average person about financial literacy?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was something that we came up with in our hardwood veneer manufacturing business, because oftentimes when we would ship a truckload or a container of product, the invoice might be 70, 80, $100,000. And some of the lower skilled employees that would see an invoice, or they would see the packing list, there's a copy of the invoice in there. They seem to assume that that meant that I was taking $80,000 and stacking, wads of $100 bills in my basement. They just had no concept of financial literacy and how things flowed in the organization. And I think to really help empower people to make better decisions, we need to teach our teams financial literacy and help them understand that. And so the idea we had was the largeness of the numbers that we dealt with. If we showed them spreadsheets and got into basic corporate financials, the numbers are too big. It didn't, they got lost in that. And so I always start my financial analysis, whether it's with a client or one of my own businesses, looking at things as a percentage of revenue and a percentage of gross profit over time, best years versus worst years. And I look for trends. And so thinking about that and thinking about percentages, I came up with the idea to use a $100 bill for an example of how to teach financial literacy. And what I did is I found an image online of a $100 bill and I enlarged it so it was exactly 10 inches wide. And then I took a ruler and I scored the back of it for all of the components that made up our cost of sales and all of the key components of our operating expenses and so forth. And so I had a team of our frontline employees together, and I basically just started out by explaining to them that every time we sold $100 of product, I wanted them to understand what it took for us to be able to sell that $100 of product. And so on the back of the bill, let's say, for example, our materials cost of goods was 20% of our revenue. I had scored 20% or 2 inches of the $100 bill. So I took a pair of scissors and I cut off the equivalent of 20 of the $100. And I said, so this went to pay for the logs that we had to have to produce the veneer that we sold. Let's say our freight to get that delivered was another $5 of the 100 or 5%. I cut off another 5%. And it went through to our direct labor cost of sales. Here's how much we paid for the people who actually produced it, cut that away. Then I went through categories of OpEx and I just kept cutting away at those portions. And I explained to them what it was, because they knew that we had to pay people to produce the veneer. They knew we had to pay truckers to haul the logs to us. They knew those things, but they weren't connecting the dots. And so we were in a high volume, low margin business. So, at the end of the day, if we could make 5 or 6%, we were thrilled. So it was really just a game of large numbers. And so I would get down to say there was, 6% of this $100 bill left. So it's literally kind of that last sliver. So I would explain, like, if everything goes well, this is what's left, but we still have to pay taxes. right? And so we were a C corp, so I cut away at the time roughly 35% of that. So I cut another third of it away. So now there's about 4/100ths of that $100 bill left, and it's literally just you're pinching it between your fingers. And so I said, but do you think that we need to reinvest in the business? Do we need to, spend money to upgrade systems? Do we need new equipment? Do we need to invest in those things? And of course, they said yes. I said, okay, so let's say we take 50% of what's left and we set that aside to reinvest in the business. Now I'm down to 2/100ths of that left. And I said, so if everything goes well, this is what's left at the end of the day. And then what really kind of got their attention is I said, now, what happens if somebody damages product before we're able to sell it when it's still work in process? You mismanufacture a log or you damage something and we have to replace it. Like where does that 20% come from that I cut away at the very beginning? And that's when things really started to kind of click to them, and they begin to realize, oh, okay, now they see how all of these costs stack up, and they started to see how if they made mistakes, if they went off process, things like that, how now all of a sudden, if the company has enough cash, the company has to put money back in to replace that product. If the company doesn't have enough cash to do it, essentially, I have to write a check back to the business to do that. And so it was really enlightening. And one of this was not intended, but one of the more common things I heard as a result of that were people thanking me and saying that like nobody had ever taken the time to explain how money worked like in their life growing up. Like their parents didn't do it. They were in socioeconomic classes where nobody talks about that and people don't really understand it. And so simply the fact that we took time to slow down and try to explain it in a way that they could absorb, it really created a lot of engagement because they felt appreciated that we took the time to help them understand that. And as a result, I stopped having to deal with a lot of the BS, comments and thoughts and questions because they just didn't understand.
I love that methodology, and I think it like you said, they should be teaching this in schools,
Mm,
and they're not. You
100%.
graduate from school without knowing some of the most important things to
Right.
truly be successful. So I love that. You have a line that says every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. If you want a different result, you need a different system. Can
Yes.
you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. This was so I originally thought this was an Edwards Deming quote, but it actually, in research for the book, I found it attributed to a healthcare CEO named Paul Batalden. But if you think about this, if you're on your fourth marriage and it's not going well, you have a system by which you live to generate bad marriages, right? You need to change something in the system of how you approach relationships in your marriage. It's no different in business. If you consistently hire and onboard people who fail to perform and just are mediocre performers, somewhere in your system of recruiting, interviewing, hiring, and onboarding, you have breakdowns in that system that are getting you the result you want. And so you have to think about where you have places in your organization. And again, this is personal life and professional, where you have outcomes you don't want. If you take a big step back and look at the underlying system, how you go about doing things that's getting you that result, you will often find the areas within that system that are failing you and are causing you to get the results that are less than desirable for what you want. And I think sometimes we don't step back and really look at the way we do things as a system. And usually that's because the systems we have in our business are there by default, not by design, right? And they just kind of happened into existence because that's the way we did things. And we
Hmm.
really didn't put the thought or design into it to really systemize it well.
I love that example. I think about it in a personal way. If I want to leave the house, let's say by 7:30 or 8 o'clock,
Mhm.
my system is I brush my teeth, I take a shower, there's an order to everything. But
Right.
if I'm running late or I don't do the system, I leave the house without a shirt on, or,
Right.
I don't do the things. And when you look at it and say you're getting the result based on the system, you realize that everything upstream of that can be changed and modified to get a better result. So that's
Right.
genius.
And exactly. And I think if you look at highly disciplined people and how they structure the way they go about their time management, the way they do things within their life, they have a very systematic approach to it, right? If the goal is that they're at the gym at 5:30 in the morning, regardless of how they feel, like they have a system that gets them out the door in time to be there at 5:30, and nothing gets in the way of that. And a lot of it gets back to what do you give primacy in your life and put importance on, and then do you, if I were to audit your calendar, would it prove that you really put primacy on the things you say you do?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's good. I'm going to pivot just a little bit. One of the chapters of the book talks about profit and cash
Mhm.
flow. I love profit per X. When I first learned about profit per X, it was from Walgreens. They were looking at profit
Mhm.
per square foot. And can you unpack that a little bit and explain to people what profit per X is and how you used it in your veneer business?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was something that really fascinated me. My when I was in, I'm still in YPO, but when I was originally in the Southern Seven chapter, when we were back in Virginia, my form group and I went through Good to Great together, and we all were really fascinated with profit per X, and so we spent a number of months helping each other really unpack and try to discover in each of our businesses what that was. And what I really learned from that is that the way Jim Collins talks about it in the book, kind of at a high level, is every organization has multiple ratios of profit per something that helps drive their economic engine. But you've got to get maximum impact, you have to focus on one and only one that has the greatest impact on your overall economics. And it's profit per some denominator. And the challenge often becomes, well, what's the denominator and how do I figure that out? And I often hear people start with profit per employee. And I think that oversimplifies it a little too much, because different employees come with different costs, and depending on the position they potentially deliver different levels of value. So when I hear that, I think usually what it really is profit per fully burdened human capital dollar, not per employee. But the way I go about thinking through profit per X is every business has certain constraints that limit its ability to scale without significant capital investments. And so if you're a professional service business, oftentimes it does come down to human capital. In our case, as a manufacturer, we had 4 production lines, and to add a fifth production line, which would have increased our capacity, allowed us to sell more and make more money, it would have been a $5 to $6 million investment for
Wow.
one production line. So the capital to do that was extremely prohibitive. So what we started to realize was our greatest choke point. We measured volume in terms of board feet, and that was a standard unit of measure in the hardwood industry. So what we started to realize, most of our operating expenses were completely or heavily fixed. We only had a few lines that were variable. So generally speaking, we had a monthly nut of about $250,000 to cover before, in gross profit dollars, before we made our first dollar of profit. So as we started thinking about that, we started to realize that what we needed to focus on was how how we optimize our dollars of gross profit per board foot produced. And so over time, if we could improve that ratio, additional dollars would waterfall to the bottom line. And so once we got clear on that, we did an assessment. So I think once you understand your profit per X, that's only the first step. It's really of no value until you start being highly analytical with it and using that to frame decisions and begin to do things differently and make changes. And so what we started to do was, first was a baseline assessment. So we looked at all of the species we produce. So think of those as product lines. And what was our gross profit per board foot on those, each of those species? And based on that, we realized we had one particular species, red oak, which was in incredibly high demand, but it was the most commoditized species in our industry. We needed to break even. We needed to be at $1.80 per board foot. Red oak was only contributing 50 cents per board foot, but we had
Wow.
so much demand for it. And we were letting our salespeople tell us, oh, we can sell all this red oak. We need to sell more. We need to sell more. It's like, okay, let's produce more red oak. And we were like, what the hell are we doing? We're cannibalizing our profits. So we were we were not one of the largest in our industry. And so it gave us the luxury to say, you know what, we're never going to produce red oak again. We will lose customers as a result, and we're okay with it. But what that did is it freed up capacity we had in that finite production capacity to now supplement other species that we could sell more of, that we were generating $2.20 a board foot for, or $3 a board foot on. And so we started to make adjustments in what we sold, and we it forced our salespeople to not be order takers, but to truly be salespeople. So that was a big pivot. We then started looking at all of our suppliers. So any given species, we would stack rank all of our suppliers based on gross profit dollars per board foot. And so we would adjust budgets and quotas for our procurement team based on making sure we opened up as much capacity as possible for the highest performers. The irony of all of this is, over the course of about a year and a half, making all of these adjustments, we reached a point where we had improved our monthly gross profit by about $100,000, and we did it without spending a penny of OpEx, just by changing our decisions. So literally, that was worth over $1 million a year of profit to the business, just by thinking differently and having that knowledge of our profit per X. And so we work with all of our clients to figure out what their profit per X is, and then to really challenge them to use that to analyze their decisions, their strategies, why they do things the way they do, um, to help drive that economic engine.
I love that you made the invisible visible because
Mm.
you're making money. You feel like you're making money, but you don't know why. And profit per X, what you're talking about reminds me of the story. Oh, we'll just make it up in volume. We're losing money.
Mm.
So it's like if you have a Coke machine and you're buying the Coke for 35 cents, but you want to discount it because it's a nonprofit or whatever, and you say, well, we'll sell it for 25. You're losing 10 cents on every can that goes out the
Right.
door. And it's that line, oh, we'll make it up on volume. And that sounds
Yeah.
like your board foot example that you're losing money. There's no
Right.
way to cover your costs on that. And let's just keep making
So
it
let's,
bigger and
yeah, let's
bigger.
do more of that.
Yeah, let's lose more money.
Right. It's absolute lunacy. But absent the data, it's easy to get seduced into those types of decisions.
For sure.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's the idea of everything upstream affects one thing downstream, the
Right.
system, the profit per X. That's great. Talk a little bit about one size fits all for businesses, because
Mm.
I know that you came from a former, your background was with another company and kind of one size fits all. But what you're doing in your current role is more prescriptive.
Is less prescriptive, more principled.
I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah.
less prescriptive.
So, right. So, yeah. So when I exited the second manufacturing business, kind of going back to my earlier story, I spent a while as an EOS implementer, and during that time, this was 2015 to 2020. Um, I had a tremendous amount of success at that, but we operated under a license agreement, so they could not prevent me from teaching things that were not part of EOS. And so the companies I was working with, I was always trying to understand what their challenges were, and really anywhere that I could provide them something that I had learned throughout my career that may be beyond EOS, that would help them through a certain circumstance or with a certain challenge, I wanted to be able to bring that to them. So I was doing a lot of very hybrid and kind of outside the box work with the clients I was working with, and we were having a lot of success with it. But in 2020 or 2021, after Gino had sold the company to a PE firm, as often happens, things begin to change, and they transitioned to a franchise model. And the franchise agreements essentially forbid us from teaching anything that wasn't an EOS tool. So for me, that just was a complete values misalignment. And I believe it's very unentrepreneurial to take that mindset. But what I started to realize as I took a big step back and formed next level growth and started to go down this path was the business operating systems that are out there by default, and they're prescriptive in nature, and they have to be able to have hundreds and hundreds of coaches to be able to teach it. It has to be very prescriptive and very, very rigid. The problem is that puts primacy on the system, not the user. And that's one of the biggest complaints we hear from people who transition from, something like EOS or scaling up to what we do, is that it felt too rigid, or the coach they were working with always kept going back to, I've got one tool to give you, I've got one tool to teach you, and if that's not solving the issue, I'm just going to keep teaching it over and over again. And so what we really tried to focus on was, instead of taking that one size fits all approach, if instead you focus on principles, which is what we've framed as these 5 obsessions, none of our partners or guides care what tools a company uses that we work with. We don't care where they come from. We're completely agnostic to that. We are voraciously reading and studying thought leaders and new things that are coming out, to see if there's something we can learn and glean from what's already in the public space, or drawing on our own experiences to help our clients figure out, based on their industry, their circumstances, their culture, what's the best way we can systemize and create tools and processes for you that help you reach a level of excellence in this specific principle or obsession, because that's ultimately where the value is, right? The whole thing with great people, I don't care if people use tools from, scaling up, top grading, it doesn't matter where they come from. If you're obsessed about filling the organization with great people, we'll figure out how to make it fit for you, because you're also going to use it more. You're going to embrace it more. It's going to be stickier, and you're going to get more momentum. And so our approach has been to really flip that on its head and focus on how we put primacy on the user, and maintain primacy on the user, letting the system be secondary and let it be a byproduct of what the user needs, given their unique circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense. We train paramedics, and one of the things that we give them is we give them a drug box, and we give them a monitor, and we give them a bunch of tools, splints and bandages, and you name it. But that doesn't mean that every patient needs that. You
Right.
show up and you sprained your ankle. I shouldn't be splinting your neck and putting you on a backboard and giving you heart medications,
Right.
right? And that's, to me, sounds like the EOS system, at least currently how it is not focusing on the right thing. Each business has its own individual needs.
I
And
think, yeah, and I think, it's still, it's a good system, and I'm not suggesting it's not, but I think it has its limitations, in that I personally don't believe it really scales as businesses scale and grow. There are companies that are doing hundreds of millions of dollars that say they run on EOS, but the ones I've really talked to and looked at what they're doing, they've modified a lot of things to get to that scale. And so it may still be foundationally based on a lot of the same concepts. But in the world of all these business operating systems, if you think about like our 5 obsessions, most of these business operating systems are attempting to provide you tools that are still aligned with these 5 things. Right. And so the difference is, we don't come to you with one toolbox and that's how we do it.
yeah,
We want to sit down with you and figure out, do you agree that you need to excel in these 5 things? Do you truly want to be a lead? Are you truly committed to doing that work? And if you are, we will be the cheapest business partner you've ever had, because we don't take any upside, but we're going to be your partner, and we're going to help figure out how to build and craft things to help you excel in these 5 areas.
it makes a lot of sense. In EMS, we have airway, breathing, and circulation. We're always trying to fix those three things. That's what we're the best in the world at. And if those are our principles and
Mhm.
values, right? And so you said that you're basically brand agnostic. It doesn't matter what type of tool you use. If you're going to screw in a screw, it doesn't matter whether it's a DeWalt or a Bosch or Black and Decker, right?
Right.
And so you can basically customize it so that they get the result no matter what.
Yeah, and so even to your example, if you go back and think about, our strategic anchor is really around something we call experience matters, and there are 5 different areas we focus on that. But number one is the experience of our partners and guides, and I mentioned earlier in the podcast, in version, in the first half, um, the experience that I require for anybody to be part of what we do. And so take the work that you do. If you have somebody that doesn't have a significant amount of experience, and those are the 3 things they focus on, they may only have a few ways to do it because that's all they know. But if you've got somebody that's been doing it for 20 years, and it's an airway issue and they have to get really creative to figure something out, they have the
Mhm.
experience to figure it out,
For
right? And
sure.
that's a big difference. I think when you go to one of these large scale business operating systems, there are coaches within those systems who are fantastic, who have tons of experience and who are outstanding at what they do. And there are people who wrote a check to be part of that because they thought they could make money that don't have any experience. And they're literally just teaching out of a book. And I think it's just, it's just not ideal.
I heard something recently, and I think it was Elon Musk has the tree of knowledge or tree of distinction. And the idea is that if you imagine the base of the tree, the entry level person, the entry level EMT or paramedic, or in your world, the business coach, they know kind of the same things, right? But as you go further and further, there's branches of distinctions. And so as you go further and further out, you can do different things. And you having the experience you do, or like most of your coaches having a business over $10 million, you learn things that you don't learn at the $1 and $2 million
Right.
level.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, who's your ideal customer?
So, in a perfect world, we the from a revenue size, it's a pretty wide range, but we work with companies $3 million and up. Ideally, more like 5-6 million on the low end. Our largest client currently is nearing 2 billion in revenue.
Wow.
So that's a massive delta. But really, any company, any entrepreneur that is very focused on building something elite. I was talking with a prospect earlier today, and it was our first conversation. And he said he wanted, I think he's at 5 million right now, and he wants to be at 100 million. It's like, okay, why 100 million? And as I kept challenging him on the 100 million, it was like, well, I mean, that's just a number. He said, what I really want is to build a world-class business. I was like, okay, I can work with that, right? Like if you're committed to do that. And what he mentioned was he's really good at execution, but he's never done it. His $5 million business is the biggest thing he's ever built, and he needs somebody to challenge him and help point him in some directions that will prevent him from having to crash into walls and back up and do it over again. Those are the kind of people that those type of driven entrepreneurs that are coachable, that are open to outside resources, that enjoy working with mentors and things like that, that have a thirst for learning. Those are absolutely great fits. It's interesting, lots of people talk about core values internally. I think another way I would describe our ideal clients are people who share our values externally, right? And so our core values are simple. It's take ownership, be resourceful, have a thirst for learning, and be fun to work with. And if an entrepreneur has those four things in their DNA, we can absolutely do wonderful work together.
I love that you know your core values and you can recite them without having to look at a list.
Right.
I think that says a lot about your
Sure.
organization. If somebody's maybe not at the 5 million level
Mhm.
and they still want to be world class, maybe they're at maybe less than a million or 1
Sure.
million or 2 million, where would you tell them to go to start getting to a place where they could probably work with you, and
So
if it's too early now?
yeah, that's a great question. So this was a big part of why I wrote the book the way that I did. So the Five Obsessions of Elite Organizations was written strategically, much like how Gino Wickman wrote Traction, which I thought was brilliant, in that he really set out to give away a lot of the foundational things they teach. And the thought process there was, if he did that, it would be very helpful to lots of people who could not afford or didn't want to work with a coach, but it would also help people understand the brand, the methodology, and would be an attractant to to the coaching group. So I wrote this the same way, and lots of times as people read it, they realize, okay, some of the things I had felt like were missing, this solves for that. And so, for I think $20, you can buy the book. And the book was written in a way that it provides a roadmap and a how to a lot of to do these basic foundational things that we teach as part of our five obsessions. But the other thing I did is I've built an AI clone that's been massively trained on everything that we teach, all of our IP. And the thought process there was, when you only have the book to go by, you only have the examples that are in the book. So in your case, when it comes to the way we build accountability charts and missions, most critical outcomes, and obsessions, you likely won't find examples that will give you the level of detail to really figure it out for all of the seats in your company. But if you want to do that and you believe that's a great thing, you can have conversations with my clone, and the clone does a fantastic job of helping ask you questions to guide you through it and unpack what you need to get to those outcomes. It'll make suggestions. And the other thing that's interesting is I'm able to, on the back end, I'm able to see all the conversations. So if there's ever anything that the clone answers and I feel like the answer could be better, I can go in and edit the answer. It pushes the update to you via email. So you get the update directly from me, and the clone learns from that to make itself better and smarter going forward. The clone can be interacted with by text, by voice, and by video.
If they want access to the clone, how do they get that?
So that's the website for the clone is askmichaelerath.com. You can also get to it through our website or through the book. There are links in the book.
Okay. I love that the clone actually asks you questions, because so
Mhm.
many times, unless you do the prompt correctly, you don't get asked questions. It just
Right.
dumps whatever it thinks you want to know.
Right, and that was actually designed into how we built the clone. And what was interesting, I'll share this just because this is all pretty new technology. Um, so we designed the clone to always ask a prompting question at the end of an answer. So sometimes people will ask it, things it's challenged with in terms of having difficult conversations with an employee, and so it'll have a dialogue about that. But it's constantly like so. It'll ask things like, so what specifically is the conversation you're challenged with having, and it keeps asking questions to pull things out of you. But what it initially in the early stages of beta testing, when somebody was ready to end the conversation, it would still end with a question, and so we had to go in and kind of reteach it. If it hears somebody say something that is indicating the end of a conversation, like invite them to come back later, but don't keep asking questions. So it's been a fun process, kind of learning what some of the limitations are, playing around with the training. But it's been fascinating to see how well it answers and provides guidance.
Yeah. Michael, as we start to wrap up, what question haven't I asked you that I should have? Or is there anything else that you want to add?
The only thing I would add is there's no cost for this, but on our website, if you go to nextlevelgrowth.com, there is in the menu bar at the top, there's an option to take our assessment. We have an elite organizations assessment. And I think I mentioned it earlier in the first part of the podcast, but if you take that assessment, I get notified. You don't get like an automated bot that starts bugging the hell out of you. Um, when those come in, I will respond and reach out to you and offer to connect you with one of my partners. If you just want to have a conversation, there's no cost for it. They'll give you 30, 45 minutes of their time to walk through the results and help point you to resources, either through the book, downloadable resources we have, just to help you get started. So that's something we offer to do for anyone. So anybody who wants to take the assessment and have a conversation, there's no pitch, there's no pressure. It's just our attempt to help. And if at some point in time you feel like working with us would be valuable, you know where to find us. And the other hope is that for people that don't, maybe they appreciate enough of what we've created that they tell other people about it.
That's really great. Michael, if people wanted to learn more about you, how can they connect with you?
So through the website is the easiest way. There's an email address, startclimbing@nextlevelgrowth.com, or you can go to the website and there's a form to fill out on our team page. You can connect with myself or any of our partners and guides directly there.
All right. Well, Michael, this is so valuable for, I think, everybody listening. I really want to thank you for your time and your wisdom, and most of all, for showing up twice to record the second part of this. So thank
Matt
you.
enjoyed it. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All right. Until next time, take care.
Thank you.
Want more? Click below for extra resources in our podcast vault. We have show summaries, action plans, and information about coaching.